Welcome 7 Days to Die modding fans. This is Ith, and welcome back to the new series of tutorials on animation for 7 Days to Die. So what we're going to do is we're going to build on what we learned on the previous tutorials on how to create a block in Unity and then export that block into 7 Days to Die and get it to work. This time we're going to use entities. So let's get started. First we need to get an entity that we can work on during this tutorial and the subsequent ones. So we're going to use this guy called Zombie. We got to search for him with the search utility in the Unity Asset Store. And when you find that guy, then click on Import. And that will bring up a screen that will, I think we can see it here, that will let us click on the import here, make sure they're all checked, and click on Import. And that'll bring a copy of this guy into our Unity session. And it takes a second. If you've downloaded things before, it will delete the previous package. Yep, there we have it. Okay, so down here on the bottom is a new entry in our project list called Zombie. And in the Zombie folder is a texture folder for the coloration on the entity, and then the model. So let's go to the model folder. There's a bunch of objects in here right now. We'll talk a little bit them another time, but the one that we want to be concerned about is this here. It is z@walk.fbx. An FBX file is a format file that you're going to commonly see. I like to work with FBX files. They give you the most flexibility even if they're not the easiest to use all the time. .obj files are also good as well. So let's look at that file real quick. In the inspector here on the right, there are three tabs: Model, Rig, and Animation. The first one is the properties of the model itself, and there is a scale factor which shows you relatively how small or large the object will be in Unity, and that needs to be adjusted at times when you bring the entity into Unity. He sometimes will appear to be a giant or small as a rat, and that's where you make the adjustments there. Bigger numbers are going to make it larger, and smaller numbers are going to make it smaller, obviously. We don't need to change much in this particular area here. All these settings are okay. The most important thing to do is switch to Rig, and you can see the animation type is generic. Generic is the new Mech-Anim animation type. We're going to be working with Legacy, so we need to change that, and we'll click on it and click Legacy. And you see it's changed that there, and we click Apply. That's going to change the animations built into this particular .fbx file into Legacy. We click on the third tab, Animations, so we can see that one animation is included in this package, the walk animation, and it is 60 seconds long. Okay, so let's go back to the model, and none of the other settings in this have to be changed. So we have our object here. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and drag this left click, and drag it over here into our hierarchy. Now that does a few things. First, click on that and expand it. It's going to show you all of the different meshes and parts of that object right here. Down the bottom here we have our animation tab, which shows us that there is various bones here. These are all the different spine bone, calf bone, neck bone, foot bone, and so on. This here is called the dope sheet. That's a term the early animators used for a paper sheet that showed the various keyframes and the time of those keyframes. We have the name of the animation here. In this case there's only one. It's walk, and it's read only. We have the frames per second of this particular animation. Here it's 30 frames per second. And the important play button, which would show the animation, and the record button, which I'm going to turn off. Let's change to the scene, show our zombie here. You can see I put a cube in the scene and lowered it down a half a block. So it's at 0, -0.5, and 0. That provides a surface to show you what your zombies, whether it's positioned correctly, going to be positioned correctly in 7 Days to Die. So go back down here to the zombie here, and if I click the play button, it will start the walk animation. And you see he's kind of walking pretty slowly. If we want to change that, simply pause it. We can change the frames per second to, say, 60 frames per second. Click play again, and now you notice he's walking much faster. For those of you like their zombies a little bit faster, you might find that that's a better setting. So we're going to leave it at 60 for now. And I always find when you're finished doing anything, turn off the record button, because if you start clicking on other things and moving things around with that record button on, you're going to have unexpected changes that are going to cause you a lot of work. So get in the habit of turning that off after you're done messing down here. Okay, so we have a zombie walking around there. That's great. I want to show you one more thing in the inspector here. As we notice, when you did blocks, you have a transform. That zombie is at 0, 0, 0. That's where he should be. That should pretty much always be that way. There may be cases where you need to tweak that, but generally I have always left every one of my zombies at 0, 0, 0. I made changes elsewhere if I had to move them. There is the animation object component here. As you can see, the default animation is walk. And there's a list of animations here, which is a size of 1 because there's exactly one animation in this associated with this model at this point. It's set to play automatically. And the culling type is based on renders. Generally, that's left to always animate. When it's off screen, these zombies could stop animating, but in 7 Days to Die, you want them to wander around, and so I leave that to always animate. The other thing we need to do with the zombie right now is if we put him in game as is and you shot him, the bullets would go right through him because there is no collider on him. So we have to go ahead and put a collider on this. Now, with most models that I have found, it has a single mesh, and so you would associate a single collider with that mesh. But in this case, you see there's many meshes on this object. That's good and bad. It's bad because it's a lot more work, and you have to put mesh colliders all on every one of them to make every part of the zombie hittable. The good part is that you can do a lot of advanced special effects, such as decapitating an arm, because we can make those meshes go invisible upon a certain large hit. And I believe that's how they do it on the zombies in there in the game right now. We're not going to mess with that, but to give you an example, if I wanted to make his left upper arm blow off, if I turn off the skin mesh renderer, you notice now that part of the model is no longer rendered, and so it's essentially invisible. On, off, on, off, on. Okay? So we're not going to mess with that too much this time, but I'm going to show you some tricks we can do in a later video. So now we need to put a collider on this. Well, for the sake of time, I'm only going to put basically one collider on. So how you do that, let's go ahead and put a collider on its head, because we all love headshots. To do that, you click on Add Component. Click on Add Component, and we're going to go to Physics, and we're going to go to Mesh Collider. So here we now have a Mesh Collider object. However, under Mesh, there is no mesh associated with this Mesh Collider, and we need to associate one. How do we do that? First, you need to know the name of the mesh file name that is associated with this zombie, and you can find it by looking on the renderer, and it says mesh, small m, _, head, capital H. So let's find that. We'll go down here, we click on the dot next to the mesh entry on Mesh Collider, and we do a search. Mesh _ capital H, there he is. Double click on it, and now it's made that association. You can see the Mesh Collider floating in midair in light green, and I'm going to spin it a little bit. It's centered at 0, 0, 0, but this particular zombie's leaning forward, and so he's not where his collider is. Now that's going to give you some problems in the game. Now I'm going to click Walk, because you'd have to aim behind his head to be able to actually hit that head, and that's problematic. So let's stop that and make a change. Making sure that the actual mesh we were concerned about is selected, and that this box up here, which allows you to drag things, is selected, puts this dragging component on that you've played with before. We're going to bring that collider a little closer to the center point of the animation right there. And so now if I click play, you see he's bobbing left and right of it, and a little front and a little back. So that's about the best we're going to be able to do right now without taking the next step, which I don't want to cover in this video because it's a bit time consuming, but we will get to that. So the mesh collider now exists there. So I'm going to turn that off. So now we have the entity assembled, it has a collider. It's the right size, in the right position. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to right click and rename this guy capital Z, Z. Let's enter it. Because I don't want to, when I bring it back into this thing, I don't want it to be confused with this original Fbx file. So once I have renamed it, I left click and drag it into this asset folder. And there it is. Here's the z.prefab. Now we can go ahead and export that. You do that like you did the block. You right click on it, click on Build Asset Bundle from Selection. I'm going to put it on my desktop, and I'm going to give the package a name, and I'm going to use the same name as the object, in this case, Z. It says I've already done this before, so I'm going to replace it, but basically, yeah, you would just save that to your desktop. And there you have that Z is in there. Now, to be able to make this work, you're going to have to create a mod like we did in the first block thing, where you have a resources folder and then you have an XML file that describes the particular object. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my folder. Now, if you'll be able to see this on the screen, I'll try to resize it. There we go. And if you've created your folder structure like we did in the tutorial, you have an SDX modding folder, and it has a target mod folder. And I made a folder, I put all my entities in a folder called Sith Entities. And so here's the basic structure of a mod folder, as you know. And there's a resource folder. And in this resource folder, you would drag and drop your Z Unity 3D file and make sure that's available to the mod. Going back, you also need to have a config file that describes the properties of your entity. Let me go ahead and position this. I apologize, I work at a much higher screen resolution, so for you to be able to see this clearly, I'm working in the smallest possible to give you the clearest picture. So here we have the entity that I created, called Entity Class Z. I made this new entry, and this is XPath, and that in the mods I use XPath to basically insert XML into the game's vanilla XML. And again, that we covered that a little bit in a previous video. So we have a new entity class called Z. It extends the SDX template, which is created in Sphere created the Animation XDX mod, and that template is referenced in there. So we're going to simply extend off of that and use its basic properties. You have to create a property about the mesh that you've created, and as you know, we saved our package as Z with a capital Z, and the object in Unity right here is Z, and that is the second entry on that, just like the block. We're going to use the avatar control, in this case Animation SDX, which is a mod that you will also have to load when you build, and it was written by Sphere as basic animation commands. Some of these are duplicates, just because I use a lot of different files, but here you can set addition. If you don't like the speeds that were in the default Animation SDX package, you can override any of those properties in here, make them a little faster, a little slower. Of critical importance here is this section about the animation. 7 Days to Die expects certain animations, such as the animation idle, animation main attack, second attack. When you hit the zombie, it calls animation pain. When it dies, it calls animation death. There's run, walk. There's also jump, and there's also a special attack that you can use as well. You may notice that I called all of these walk, because in the mod here, you notice there's only one animation, walk spelled with a capital W. If you were to name that walk with a capital W, it's going to throw errors in 7 Days to Die. So let me go ahead and bring that back up again, and you notice it's all lowercase. Now I put walk on all these because I wanted to be able to keep that structure there for the next episode, and so it's okay to have them walking when all of those things happen. Later on, we'll replace death with a death animation and run with a run animation, and so on and so forth. But right now, I'm using the one animation we have as a placeholder value in every one of those calls. It's okay to leave second attack. We could leave that completely out. That won't throw an error. It does, though, look for an idle and a walk, so make sure you have those bases covered. Also, I put in I use the default bandit sounds here because if you want to have your zombies moan and react when they, sound-wise, when they get hit, you want to include that. So there we go. That's all done. Let's go ahead and go into 7 Days and Die, and we're going to run the SDX tool here. I think you're all familiar with this part of the process. Just like before, we make sure you have Animation SDX selected. And I have my mod that has the zombie entry here already checked. So I would just simply refresh it and I would build it. And then I'm going to click play and I'm going to edit the video to cut all this long part out. Okay, we're back. And apologize for the screen being just a little bit off. But it's hard to match the windowed resolution to the recording resolution. This should be good enough to show you what's going on. So we need to go into debug by typing dm so we can generate a zombie. And press function 6, and that will bring up our menu. You can see Z is here. I'm going to click on that to spawn him.
Awesome. There's no escape.
And there's the little devil. Now you notice there's several problems with him. First of all, he's kind of animating too slow of his walk for the speed that he's going. And his coloration is a bit off, but he definitely has a texture there, so that's good. We can fix that. So let's go ahead and test his colliders. I'm going to shoot him in the gut a few times. You notice there's no blood, nothing. So let's go ahead now and see if we can get a headshot, because that's the only place there's a collider. Yep, and he's dead. Now you notice there's no death animation. Death animation is the only animation without a loop. Right now he's looping the walking animation because we told it on death walk, and so that's what it's doing. When you have a death animation, it would stop and it would fall down. But just like any other zombie, there's a head collider there, and he will, turn into a gore block like any other zombie. So that's it. We got a working zombie. On the next episode, we're going to clean it up a bit, maybe add another animation, and take it from there. So I hope you enjoyed it. Practice this. This stuff gets complicated really quick, so make sure you have these basics down. And I look forward to talking with you in the next video.